this crazy investment? And I think probably the answer to that is it really happened by degrees. That I wanted to. It became clear that Central Otago was an area, and that's where I lived. It was possible to grow really interesting wine there. So, and I'd had a bottle of. Speaking of mentors, I'd had a bottle made by Rudy Bauer, and it was a Ripon bottle, 1991. Yeah, 1991 Ripon Pinot Noir. Now, Ripon was a vineyard founded by an old family friend of ours called Rolf Mills, and his son Nick Mills runs Ripon now. Now, this vineyard was one of the two first to plant Pinot Noir in recent years in Central Otago. And he planted his vines, I think, probably in the early 80s. I think he planted those Pinot Noir grapes. He tried all sorts of things as well that didn't work. He tried Shiraz and Cabernets and all sorts of unsuitable grapes, but Pinot Noir there was something magic about that. And that bottle of 1991 I thought was completely magic, and it was very reminiscent to me of some of the Burgundies, red Burgundies that I've been drinking in London when I first got to London in the early 80s. And I thought, there really is something happening here, and I'd like to see if I can do that. So I bought a small piece of land and I planted about 2 acres of Pinot without much expectations really. I thought, I don't know if this is going to be a good site or not. And that was a 97. That was a 97 we planted. 93. And then in 97 we had our first vintage. In 1998 I opened the first bottle from that vintage and was quite astonished by how good it was. So then I thought it sort of gradually got me by degrees, and I became more and more wanting to be, I wanted Two Paddocks to be better and better. So I acquired 2 more small plots elsewhere in Central Otago, and now that 208 that you tasted, that is a combination of all 3 of those little vineyards. Some years I'll make single vineyard Pinots, and some years when there's nothing particularly pressing. I think a vineyard has to speak to you to say. That's something I was talking about before. It has to say something loud and clear. It has to be apparent that it wants to be particular. In 2008, none of us felt that there was anything particularly pressing about that. So all the best selection from all 3 vineyards is in those wines. Now, 2009 is much less of that. That's still a ways off from being released, and that was a much crueler year. My main vineyard at Red Bank, it was like God came along and bombed me personally, because there was a frost event that hit that vineyard and practically nobody else. I lost 100% of my grapes from that vineyard. So what was the other 2 little vineyards, sustained, but that vineyard 100% loss. So 208 was a benign vintage, nothing particularly special about it. I think Nigel said the same thing for Felton Road. we had no problems, but there was nothing particular about it. 209 was, by way of contrast, extremely difficult and 100% loss in the main vineyard. But those two little vineyards that persisted, that came through, there's not much of it. I think I've only got about 800 cases or something like that, which will be, when it comes into its own, that's going to be a very, very smart wine. And but there's so little of it that it'll go in the blink of an eye, I'm afraid. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure if there was so many dimensions to your questions that I probably got off the point.
I understand. Sorry about that. The second question is that in regards to developing a winery that you have done over the last 2 decades, I suppose. What was the most defining moment for you? Really?
Well, I suppose that first bottle of wine I opened. That was the thing that drove everything else. That was like a trigger being pressed on a gun. I realized that this was extremely. Found this very compelling, what we were doing, and I wanted to do more of it. I didn't want to be big. We're never going to be big. We're tiny. But I wanted to be bigger than that. I wanted more than 2 acres. So now it's about 20 acres, I think, something like that. So we're by any standards a tiny vineyard, and hard to find, but it's big enough for me. And what were the other defining things? Well, when all 3 of those vineyards, there was a marvelous moment when we took the first grapes off all 3 vineyards. That was, because planting is one thing, then you have to be patient for 4 years before you start to see anything at all. It could be worse. It could be growing oak trees, in which case you have to wait for 200 years. By that time you're well dead.
Do you have any plans for creating any newer varietals?
No. What I do have is a small amount of Riesling, a small parcel of Riesling, about 3 acres of Riesling. And I planted the Riesling because my wife perversely decided one day she no longer wanted to drink red wine. So she wouldn't be happy until I planted some white wine. So I planted what I thought was actually the most interesting variety, Central type. I think I'm right in that. I think that was a good call. She's gone back to red wine now, so it's kind of. But if she hadn't done that, I wouldn't have planted that white wine at all. And that's been fun, And every year we understand the Riesling more, and I think given a little more, it's a very nice, approachable Riesling now. But I reckon in about 5-10 years we'll be producing Rieslings with, some quite serious complexities to them. And so in short, I'm getting a little ambitious for the Riesling.
What kind of cuisine do you recommend and have you, for the consumers that are based in Asia, especially that will match alongside with your red and white wine? And of course, the last question is most important about is that have you tried any of the local food here in Singapore?
Yes, not enough. But we did actually take. We were in Langkawi a couple of nights ago, and we put Two Paddocks up against Thai food, which is something I'd never have thought of doing. And we did surprisingly well. Mind you, it was he went easy on the chili. So it was mild, you know, Thai food. But I was surprised how well I knew that Riesling would do well against Thai food because, you know, it has those lime and tangerine zest kind of qualities to it. That's the sort of thing that you would imagine would go well with Thai food, and I think it does. But you know, it was surprisingly. I mean, I want to try more of this. I want to try it, you know, against more Asian food. And the obvious ones are obviously things like Peking duck, which is robust Chinese food, you know. Sancho Bao, you know, I love Pinot with that. The next thing I want to do is try some Pinot with Vietnamese food, and I suspect that's, you know, given the French influence in Vietnamese food, there's probably more matches there than you would think. Not the red hot stuff, but you know, we'll see.
Well, thank you, sir. You know, and,
thank you very much, and I'm glad you
I hope
appreciate your feedback. It's very nice to hear that.
Yes, I hope that you will come back to Singapore and Asia to pronounce more of your flavors.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's what we need to do. Yeah.